We all have stories to tell. And when we tell them, we pass along wisdom. I love that word. In the spotlight, a woman whose story is so unique, so extreme, so adventurous, you will be hard-pressed to find another woman quite like her. She describes herself as a wife, a mother, a pastor, a survivalist, a long-distance runner, a rock climber, a skier, and an MMA fighter. But that's not all. She's a crafter, a knitter, a seamstress, a chef, I'm exhausted, a beekeeper, a horsewoman, a chicken lady, a gardener, a children's book author, an illustrator, a speaker, an international traveler, and she is the force behind Three Match Creations, which is based in the little town of Sterling, Massachusetts. This is Heather Cook. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Candy.
I'm thoroughly exhausted from that description. First of all, we had a moment when we first met each other and you wanted to keep your hat on. So we have it perched on top of your headphones, but you're okay.
I'm okay.
How's it going?
It's going great. Thank you for having me.
I hardly don't even know where to start, but let's do it. You grew up in the wilderness, literally off the grid in Montana. Can you paint us a picture and tell us what that was like?
I always say that it wasn't the end of the world, but you could see the end of the world from there. We lived in a tiny cabin on the side of a beautiful river, and on the other side of the river were the Canadian Rockies, just as far as you could see. And it was like you were a little island of humanity in the middle of nowhere. My mother cooked 3 meals a day on a wood stove. We raised our own food. We canned, we preserved, we dried. It was all about just surviving. We had horses one time. This is a true story. In the winter of '88, which was one of the worst winters in the history of Montana, we got snowed in, and my dad had to ride the horse 12 miles to the nearest telephone to make a phone call. And I just thought everybody lived like that, but I found out later that they didn't, in fact.
What was it like for you to find out that the rest of the world didn't live like that?
I felt very sorry for them because I felt like it was such a privileged life. I loved it so much. It was so much a part of my identity and the resources that I had that I just couldn't believe that nobody else had that growing up.
Did you go to school?
I didn't. I was what I like to call unschooled. Not that I didn't have plenty of learning opportunities. My parents were not ignorant. They both have higher educations. And my mom is actually a school teacher by trade. But we lived in the middle of the woods. They provided so many learning opportunities for us. Our house was full of books and just experiences and travels that we got to have. However, my mom just believed that kids would learn on their own and that the natural curiosity of a child would drive them to their own education. And so she let us dictate our own learning. My first day in any kind of education was my first day in college.
So there's a story about you taking 3 matches into the woods to see how long you could survive. Can you tell us that story?
One of my favorite things to do, this is a big part of what I believe, and I think it comes a lot from my childhood, from my upbringing, is that we don't need as much as we think we need. What we need is the will to survive, the power of our mind, and our faith to just get us through pretty much anything. So one of my favorite things was to take just 3 matches, the Strike Anywhere matches, and see how long I could survive in the woods. So if I could build a fire, then I could boil my water. And if I could drink that water, then I would have enough energy to go forage for food, et cetera, and build myself out of the woods. And I've used that throughout my life so many times. Just ask myself, in this situation, what are my matches?
Wow. Okay. So how old were you when you started doing this?
I would say probably about 6 years old. That's when I would really just go out and kind of see how long I could make it. 7.
It's mind-boggling to me because I'm thinking about my own daughter, Colleen, and I'm thinking of her coming to me at 6 saying, okay, Mom, I'll see you later. I got my 3 matches and I'm going out into the woods. And I'm guessing that's exactly what you said to your mom.
It's pretty much how it went down. And my mother, I think, probably had more of an eye on me than I knew. But they weren't negligent parents by any means, but my mother and my father both just believed in creating independence in their children and letting them take on risks and situations and gauging that and going forward with that.
I have to think that there was a reason why your parents decided they wanted to go off the grid and raise a family there.
I think they were also out of the box thinkers. I know that they both were, actually. They just were unconventional, both of them. And I do believe they very much wanted to combat modern society. And they wanted to give their children a totally unique life. And I think they believed that the kind of person that they would raise in a place that was so independent from regular culture would be a very authentic and solid person. And that's what they set out to do.
You know what, though, Heather? This feels lonely to me. And yet you're laughing, so I guess it wasn't to you. Was there magic in it?
I thought it was wonderful. I was not lonely at all. I think that's where a lot of my creativity and curiosity came from, because I was so understimulated. And as you would imagine, there was no electricity, there was no TV. I haven't watched like The Wizard of Oz. I've never seen it in my life. All these classic things that I think people experience, like you haven't seen. No, I haven't. It was just
yet you survived.
I did, but I had the woods and the animals and the beauty all around me, and it was a constant stimulation and a constant inspiration. And when I learned to read, which was at 12 years old, I was an avid reader, and books were my friend.
How did you learn to read?
I taught myself.
How did that work?
My mom went over the sounds of what letters made early on. We had these little flashcards at the end, because I had asked her. I said, I think I want to learn how to read. She didn't really do this until I had said, I really want to learn to read. And we went over the sounds, the phonics, and it just clicked one day. I just saw the words and heard the sounds, and I understood.
And then you devoured it.
I devoured it.
What books do you remember reading?
I remember reading Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace at 16.
What? The whole thing?
The whole thing. That was because everybody had said, oh, that's a difficult book to read. And of course, if it's a challenge, I just wanted to do it. So I took it on, and I thought it was absolutely incredible. And I remember reading that at 16. But I loved the Laura Ingalls Wilder series.
Oh, yeah.
Because I identified so much with her spirit and with her almost rebellion in a way, but her tenacity to survival. I still read those books to my kids avidly. So
I am guessing that you learned early on about self-confidence, self-endurance, inner strength, reliance, all that stuff. What were the greatest lessons of the wilderness for you?
Well, one is that you don't need as much as you think you need, and that the power of the mind is the strongest resource you have. And in my opinion, it's also your greatest obstacle. Because when you're in the woods and your mind starts playing tricks on you, that's when your survival is in jeopardy. And I find that also true in life, that when your mind gives up on something, you're done. But if your mind decides to do it, doesn't matter what your physical struggles are. It doesn't matter what you have in your way. If your mind has decided to do it, it's as good as done. That's probably one of the biggest lessons. The other thing that I think the wilderness has taught me is that there are different ways of doing things. And if you go out and you try and it fails, and you try something else and that works, it's kind of this discovery of you don't have to look at the problem one way. You can have different solutions for the same problem. And I think that's really helped me in my coping throughout my life and my experiences. And somewhere in there is also a deep sense of capability. When you don't depend on other people for resources or for what you need, but you just go out and you do it all alone, it creates this sense of capability that you kind of feel like you could do anything.
What does it mean then to be brave? And did you ever have to be brave in any of these circumstances? I'm going to guess that you did.
What is bravery? I think that bravery can be a lot of things. I don't have a lot of fear. And yes, there were times where I think I had to be brave. You know, there was a bear who tried to break into our house once. I remember that story. A big
Whoa, 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 whoa. I need to hear more about this. There's a bear at the door. What do we do now?
My mother was an incredible cook, and she had baked cookies, and the bear was down in the river fishing, and I guess had decided he would rather have chocolate chip cookies than fish. And he came up to the house. There's a huge silverback grizzly, which they're really big. I mean, when they stand on their feet, they're like 10 feet tall. They're massive. And he wanted into the house. And so he went up to the kitchen window, and it was a big like picture window, and he was pushing on the window. And I remember being more amused than actually afraid. But my mother got some pots and pans and like made a lot of noise, and it wasn't deterred. It came over to the living room window and was like pushing on the living room window. And, you know, it eventually went away. But it's kind of... I don't really remember being scared, because I remember thinking, oh, my mom has pots and pans. That'll be fine. You know, it was like you just use what you have on hand.
Wow. Wow. Well, listen, there are a lot of people who are listening to this program on our YouTube channel, and there's so much more to your story.